Okay, today we're going to talk about U.S. interventions in Haiti and Cuba. So these are largely going to be military interventions with political and economic dominance in the background. So Haiti and Cuba are both in the Caribbean. They're part of the major islands in the Caribbean. So the United States government looked at those areas as useful for trying to control the entire Caribbean Sea and used that to further control the Panama Canal and access to the canal from the oceans, basically. So we'll start off with Haiti. There we go. Okay, Haiti is here on the western third of the Hispaniola island. So Haiti shares that island with the larger country, the Dominican Republic, and had for well over 100 years, basically from their independence in the early 1800s. Um, Haiti has a lot of financial difficulties. U.S. warships had been in Haitian waters for years, up until about 1910 or so, basically there to ensure that the Haitian government collects its import taxes, its tariffs, and that those import taxes are used to either fund the Haitian government or pay off foreign loans, pay down foreign loans. So Haiti had 7 different presidents from 1910 to 1915. So 7 presidents in 5 or 6 years. There's great instability in the country politically. The latest president is named Jean Vilbron Guillaume Sam. He went into office in very early 1915, so he's a new president of Haiti in 1915, and his big policy to deal with the national debt crisis and the problem of all these foreign bankers making demands is to basically have the Banque Nationale, the national bank, to have them stop collecting import taxes. So he started that policy right when he entered office in early 1915. And the thing to know about the Banque Nationale is that the U.S. controlled that bank. U.S. bankers basically controlled it by 1915. So now this new president comes into office and thinks that he's going to run the government bank himself, as if he was actually governing the country somehow. So kind of an amazing thought that very much was surprising to a lot of the American bankers who were used to their high level of influence over the Haitian government. So after 7 months in July 1915, a revolt breaks out against Sam, against the government. And it's a very difficult revolt for the Haitian government to put down. It becomes very bloody. And there's atrocities on both sides. For example, Sam and his military leaders massacred almost 200 prisoners that they had taken from amongst the revolutionaries. And a lot of those people that they executed were from elite landowning families in Haiti, so that tended to anger some of the wealthiest people in the country, native Haitians. So at this point, it looks like the revolt is gaining steam, and it looks like they're going to overthrow the government. So Sam actually took refuge in basically the French embassy, but popular mobs broke into the embassy and murdered him in July of 17. Brought his body out to the public square and dismembered it in public, and then dragged his body parts throughout the capital city. So that's a fairly disgusting and public end to the sitting president of Haiti. So the United States government is watching all this, these revolutionary occurrences in Haiti in 1917, and is very worried about Haitian instability. And the U.S. government says that it's going to intervene in Haiti militarily in order to basically stop the anarchy and the violence and bring back some semblance of law and order and stability. So the Wilson administration, the Democratic President Woodrow Wilson and his highest advisors like Secretary of State Lansing They make several public statements that they are going to intervene in Haiti in the summer of 1917 in order to basically promote humanitarianism, stop the violence, stop the bloodshed, reestablish law and order, and bring stability back on some level. But historians have read the internal debates amongst the Wilson administration, what the advisors were telling the president, and what they were discussing, basically. And it appears that all their internal debates were focused on U.S. foreign policy and their goals and strategies to control the Caribbean and the Panama Canal. So they didn't even really talk about humanitarianism very much. They're much more focused on just U.S. strategic goals for the region. Basically, what can the region do for the United States? So the Wilson administration decided to launch a military invasion of Haiti in July of 1915, basically landing Marines on the Haitian shoreline and attacking the country's military. And very quickly, the United States military overwhelmed the Haitian defenses, and any Haitian fighters that want to continue fighting against the U.S. invasion and becoming an occupation basically run off into the mountains to form guerrilla movements because they could not defeat the U.S. Army in a kind of head-to-head battle on kind of normal battlefields. So the United States government and military will occupy Haiti for the next several years and try to figure out how to build some kind of stable Haitian government that will largely be under U.S. control. The general Haitian population is aware of this stuff. They are aware that they're under foreign occupation, and they're not happy about it. The general population generally hated the U.S. soldiers in their country, hated the U.S. intervention, and did almost anything that they possibly could on a day-to-day basis to embarrass or humiliate U.S. soldiers and try to convince them to leave. So one of the more popular stories is that at first U.S. soldiers, they went on patrol every day. They patrolled the streets of the main cities. And usually they would walk through the sidewalks along the sides of the streets while they're on patrol. But the Haitian people started dropping household waste from windows above those streets, above the sidewalks. So several stories up, basically the Haitian households would drop trash on the soldiers as they marched by. And the U.S. didn't want to go into those buildings and attack the civilian population because that could turn into a disaster. So instead, the U.S. patrols were forced to basically march down the middle of the streets in order to avoid having stuff dumped on them on a daily basis. So that's one example that historians have cited from diary entries and letters home from U.S. soldiers and whatnot. Haitian farmers also stopped sending food into the capital city and other major cities where the U.S. soldiers were stationed in order to try to starve the U.S. soldiers out of the country, basically. So farmers stopped sending food. They stopped selling food to the U.S. Army in large amounts in order to use some kind of popular pressure, some kind of economic pressure to convince the U.S. military to withdraw, to go back home. The downside of that strategy is that if food is not making it into the capital cities, that doesn't just harm U.S. soldiers that are stationed there, it also harms the general Haitian population that lives in those cities who don't have enough of a backyard basically to grow food for themselves. So it's, that kind of food denial strategy also harmed a whole lot of the Haitians living in the cities who are also going to start starving. So the United States government made the decision to start importing food into Haiti to feed the general Haitian population that is destitute and starving. So that's the kind of extremes that the U.S. government and U.S. military were forced to take just in order to kind of stabilize the country or stabilize their position in the country. A lot of U.S. leaders didn't even want to do that. They did not want to feed the Haitian population because a lot of the Haitian population is black or native Caribbean, and a lot of U.S. leaders are, in the Wilson administration, are from the South, and they're very racist against any non-white people. So a lot of U.S. leaders worried that if the U.S. government started handing out food to the Haitian population, that a lot of those darker-skinned Haitians would become so lazy that they wouldn't be able to take care of themselves in the future, and they would become completely dependent on the U.S. government. So there's a lot of racist tropes and beliefs that are in the highest levels of the U.S. government as they're trying to figure out how to deal with this kind of humanitarian problem. But they do decide to continue trying to feed the Haitian population that's kind of under their watch, really. And there's also a giant medical problem in Haiti. The hospitals are not very advanced. There's not enough doctors in Haiti. So the U.S. Navy Medical Corps not only started feeding the Haitian population, but also delivering medical care to a lot of the destitute Haitians. And this was a revelation to a lot of Haitians who suddenly had some amount of access to some of the more advanced scientific and medical treatments and devices in the world. So even some of the most dedicated Haitians who hate the American intervention, who hate the occupation and want to get rid of it, they still look at the U.S. Navy in a fairly favorable light, at least for delivering food and medical treatment to the poor Haitian population. So the U.S. intervention also rebuilt U.S. control over the national bank, the Banque Nationale, and basically used that bank to run the import tax system, the tariff, the customs collections, basically, in which gave the U.S. government effective control over Haiti's entire government revenue, basically. So some leaders in the U.S. military that are on the ground in Haiti say that that control over the Haitian government's revenue was so extreme that it was even greater than the control that the U.S. was wielding over Cuba at the time. And remember, the U.S. had virtually total control over Cuban finances. That's even written into the Cuban Constitution. So the amount of economic control that the U.S. wielded over Haiti in the 19-teens and 1920s and even going into the 30s was pretty extreme. It was pretty extensive. Of course, the U.S. leaders justified this as the U.S. wants to run the Haitian finances because the Haitians were too corrupt to do it themselves and do it in a trustworthy way that would, help the general Haitian population. So that was generally their excuse. But we know again internally that Wilson and Lansing and others were mostly trying to figure out how they can control Haiti in order to use Haiti as a tool to control the Caribbean, in order to control the Panama Canal for the long term. And that they're largely just looking for excuses or opportunities to build some kind of strong Haitian government that could keep the Haitian population under control, but a Haitian government that the U.S. can control by extension. So the Wilson administration looked for legal justifications to do this. Couldn't really find any in international law or Haitian law or even U.S. law. So the Wilson administration really sent its military into Haiti and started this occupation without any great legal justifications and really without much of a long-term plan for occupying the place or setting up any kind of long-term government. President Wilson was on record saying that he wanted constitutional government set up for Haiti as soon as possible, but didn't really specify what that meant. Would the new Haitian government be responsible for following the old Haitian constitution that's been around for a while? Will the United States write a new constitution for Haiti? Will the United States push a new Haitian leadership that the Americans choose, who those leaders are, to write a new constitution? All this stuff is really up in the air. And there's no real clear decisions from Washington, D.C. about exactly what should happen for a while. So the first few months of the occupation are fairly confused. The United States government, the Wilson administration, basically started casting around looking for someone to take the Haitian presidency that would agree to basically run the government with cooperation from the United States. So the U.S. basically contacted a bunch of leading Haitian politicians, contact four different candidates directly that historians know about, and all four of them turned it down immediately because they did not want to be a U.S. puppet. The most famous of these four candidates was named Rosalvo Bobo, He was largely famous for having led some of the first uprisings against the previous president's government, the guy who got overthrown and was killed in the French embassy. So he was known as one of the revolutionary leaders, and he was extremely popular amongst the Haitian poor because he was also a doctor and was known to give free medical services to poor Haitians, especially in areas around the capital city. So the general Haitian population loved Bobo and were very supportive of him. So the United States contacted him, asked him if he wanted to be the next Haitian president. Even as they did this, U.S. leaders did not trust him very much at all, because he had had a long history of public statements against the United States and especially U.S. Control over Haiti and the Haitian government and its finances, its revenue. So Bobo had a long-standing kind of personal stance against U.S. control over Haiti. But even then, U.S. leaders still asked him if he wanted to be president, basically. And he told them personally, really, no, he didn't want to be president if he would just be a U.S. puppet. He would accept the presidency if it was legitimate and he could run Haiti independently without U.S. oversight. So a lot of U.S. leaders actually considered him to be somewhat insane for having these kinds of nationalistic stances, which is an interesting interpretation that U.S. leaders with that someone who wants to run their own country independently without U.S. dominance just couldn't be in their right mind. So that tells you a lot about how U.S. leaders think about Haiti and other areas of Latin America, that they are deserving or required or need some kind of U.S. oversight to run their countries well or effectively. So the U.S. leaders didn't really trust him, and he didn't trust the U.S. leaders, so he wasn't really heavily considered to be a candidate by either side, either himself or the U.S. government. So the U.S. next contacted a guy named Philippe Soudre d'Artigonov. He was the president of the Haitian Senate, so he was one of the highest sitting senators in Haiti. And the U.S. government offered him to be the next Haitian president, and he very eagerly accepted that offer. And his only real demand was that the U.S. government help protect him personally, because he knows that he's going to be basically a U.S. puppet, and he knows that a lot of the Haitian population is going to hate him for this. So he basically demanded that the U.S. government help protect him against any uprising. And the U.S. was very willing to make that deal with him. So D'Artigonov agreed to give the U.S. control over Haiti's tax system, especially its import taxes, its tariffs, and allowed the United States to take control over general Haitian finances, especially the national debt. And D'Artigonov even offered to give the United States a full-time, long-term military base in Haiti itself to station American troops. He also agreed to give into U.S. demands for United States investors to basically control most of the major national railroad systems in Haiti. So he is willing to give over a whole lot of power and influence to the United States in exchange for being made the president and being kept in power with U.S. defense forces, basically. So U.S. leaders were very willing to make this deal with him, even though they considered him and his family to be very corrupt, and there's a feeling that he was going to do some amount of embezzlement to enrich himself and his family. But the United States was willing to accept that in order to exert that level of control over Haiti. D'Artigonov's problem, though, is that he could never control the political anger against the United States in the country, and even against his own government that he's going to start leading in late 1915. So he is forced to declare martial law throughout Haiti in September 1915, just basically a month after he's in office. So he is a hated figure amongst the Haitian population. They don't like him or trust him at all. And there's so much criticism of him and his government being published in Haitian newspapers and spoken in the general public that he issued a media censorship law that made it illegal to publish anything that was critical of the government or spread false information about the government or incited any level of violence against the government. So that shows you how paranoid and worried Dartiganov and his advisors and leaders are of their own population. Dartiganov then started to negotiate with the United States a treaty that would legalize the U.S. intervention in Haiti and possibly even give the United States even more power to choose financial advisors that would generally run all of Haiti's economy, at least run the government tax collection and spending systems. So they write up a treaty in really October, November 1915. So the Haitian president has negotiated this, but he cannot approve it himself. It goes to the Haitian Senate for ratification under normal Haitian law, under their constitution. And the Haitian Senate didn't like this treaty, did not want to give so much power to the United States over the Haitian government. And the Haitian Senate refused to ratify the treaty for a while. And some historians argue that the senators were taking a stance against U.S. control over their country. Other historians argue that the senators, had no hope of retaining control over their own country. Instead, that they withheld ratification in order to use that as leverage to get more loans and bailouts from the United States, from bankers, and to get the United States to release a bunch of tax revenue that the U.S. government had collected, import taxes, to release it to the Haitian government so that the Haitian government could pay its bills, so it could basically pay its employees, and also to generally run the Haitian government to buy the things that the government needed. So there's a standoff between the Haitian Senate and the U.S.-backed Haitian leadership. And the U.S. military was eventually able to break that stalemate in November when they threatened a bunch of the senators with being charged with bribery. So the U.S. military told these senators that were refusing to ratify the treaty, you either ratify it soon or else we're going to bring criminal charges of bribery against you. And what do you know, the Senate ratified the treaty the next day in November 1915. And then the United States Senate ratified the treaty unanimously a couple months later in February 1916. And the U.S. Senate didn't even debate the treaty. They just voted on it and approved it unanimously. So the treaty itself gives a whole lot of power to the United States. Number one, it gives the United States complete control over Haitian finances and revenue. So taxes and spending. And it will appoint economic advisors, financial advisors basically, to run those systems. And those will be people from the United States. It also says that Haiti is not allowed to alter or change its tax policies, its tax brackets, or to borrow money, which means that the Haitian government cannot make its own decisions about its own national debt. The United States controls those decisions. The United States will also build up a new Haitian army and appoint all officers within the Haitian army. So U.S. military leaders will decide who will run the new Haitian army, and of course they're going to promote people into leading the Haitian army that are going to be very controllable by the U.S. or at least pro-U.S. or willing to basically follow orders from U.S. forces. And the treaty forces Haiti to agree to a binding arbitration system for any complaints about foreign companies in Haiti. And binding arbitration is an important thing that you should probably know about, even regarding credit cards and car loans and things like that today. It basically means that when you agree to binding arbitration, it means that you no longer have the freedom to sue in court. If you think you're being wronged, you cannot just file a lawsuit. You have to go to this arbitration process that the other side usually controls. So, for instance, credit cards, when you sign an agreement to get a new credit card, you usually in the fine print agree to binding arbitration, and the credit card company gets to choose the judges that will hear the arbitration case. So the system is basically stacked against the individual person, and is stacked in favor of the credit card company. And you see the same thing happening with Haiti in the United States. The United States will get the power to choose who runs the arbitration system, and therefore, even if the Haitian government wants to file complaints through arbitration, they're probably going to lose, because they're going to go in front of judges that are appointed by the United States. And the treaty was supposed to last for 10 years, from 1915 to 1925, but in the early 1920s, they signed another deal that actually extends the thing to 1936. So this very lopsided, favorable to the United States control over Haiti continues for 20 years, unabated. So now that the treaty has been signed, and pretty much delivered by the end of 1915, the first U.S. military leaders who were in charge of the initial invasion and occupation, who had worked fairly well with the Haitian leaders, those U.S. military leaders start to leave. They go back home. They get basically cycled out and sent to other bases around the world. So they leave Haiti in the first few months of 1916. And the United States military brings in much more racist military men into Haiti, who basically hated Haitians. They hated any dark-skinned people, and basically accused the Haitian government of being completely corrupt, and the Haitian people of being basically animals. So it's a lot of southern white racists that are in the U.S. military that are now brought into Haiti to really run Haiti, and they really disparage any level of Haitians. They actually think that the poor Haitians are the best, because the poor ones know that they're poor, and so they, so-called know their place, in quotes. The people that the American racists really hated were the wealthier Haitians, who pretend to be equal as white people in the racist U.S. interpretation. So there's quite a lot of history there with how badly the United States military treated the Haitian leadership, starting in early 1916, when all these much more heavily racist U.S. leaders kind of cycle in, and they're going to be the overseers and the dominant forces in Haiti for the next 20 years, at least. So the U.S. Marines stay in Haiti to 1934. A new Haitian constitution is passed, and that only really changes when President Roosevelt comes into office in the United States and wants to kind of hit the reset button on a lot of U.S. relations with Latin America. And so it's going to be Roosevelt who basically pulls the Marines out of Haiti. But that doesn't mean U.S. influence leaves. U.S. financial advisors stay in Haiti through the 1930s and continue to basically run the Haitian finances. They continue running the tax collection and the spending systems. And they run it for the benefit of U.S. investors and bankers. So these financial advisors who continue running the Haitian tax and spending systems in the 1920s and 30s, historians estimate that they use about 2/3 of that tax revenue to directly pay down the national debt and to pay off U.S. bankers that had loaned money to Haiti and to the Haitian government. So they only spent about 1/3 of the Haitian government revenue on public works like building roads or sewage systems or plumbing or electrification or whatever. And the financial advisors, from their own written statements, we know that they realized that just spending 1/3 of the government revenue was not nearly enough to modernize the country or even continue Haiti on its normal kind of development trajectory like it was on before the U.S. intervention even started. So historians are very critical of this stuff, basically saying that these U.S. financial advisors really ran Haiti for the benefit of American investors more than anything else. They did not run Haitian finances for the benefit of the Haitian government or the Haitian people. And U.S. control over Haiti's finances, even after a bunch of those financial advisors even leave, will continue until at least 1947, when the last of the U.S. bankers are basically paid off. Haitians were allowed to start choosing their own legislature and their own president in 1930, but again, those financial advisors that stay through the 1930s really kind of exert still a lot of control over the Haitian government. And so it's really not until the 1940s that you're going to see kind of popular elections in Haiti that will have any impact really much at all on Haitian kind of independence. So that's a kind of short history of the U.S. intervention in Haiti for about 30 years, from 1915 to about 1947, and that takes us to the end of the U.S. experience with World War II and the start of the Cold War, which will get us into kind of Module 3, the next section of the class. But the next section of this lecture is to talk about Cuba virtually in those same years. So Cuba, again, is the biggest and the dominant island in the Caribbean, and the United States has had a lot of interest in Cuba going way back into the mid-1800s. And we've talked a lot about Cuba already in the early 1900s. The United States had enforced this Platt Amendment into the Cuban Constitution that gave the United States a lot of power over the Cuban government, even as the Cuban government has its own presidency and legislature and whatnot. Palma was the first elected Cuban president, was extremely corrupt, and was only re-elected in 1905 under massive vote rigging and fraud, and massive uprisings against him forced him to resign in 1906, but also started U.S. occupation of the island, military occupation for 3 years until 1909. And when the U.S. government felt comfortable enough to allow more elections in the 19-teens, more other corrupt parties and politicians used more fraudulent elections, especially in 1917, to try to retain control. And that started off another popular outcry against corruption and fraud, which invited or convinced the United States to start yet another military occupation that lasted for 5 years until 1922. So that's a kind of short history of the first 20 years of Cuba in the 20th century. And all during these 20 years, U.S. businesses are taking increasingly greater control over Cuba's economy one step at a time through the kind of political steps we just talked about up till 1922, to the point where any ambitious young Cubans, the only way that they can try to pull themselves out of poverty or get any access to wealth or power is to go into politics, because so much of Cuban land is being bought up by U.S. investors, or Cuban businesses are being bought up or driven out of business by U.S. competitors. So the only real reliable way for ambitious young Cubans to make a name for themselves and get into positions of wealth and power is to go into politics, to become part of the government bureaucracy and try to rise up through the ranks throughout their career. U.S. control was pretty extreme, especially over Cuba's biggest economic sector and its biggest export, which was sugar. The independence wars of the 1890s and then the U.S. occupation around the turn of the century had really destroyed a lot of the Cuban economy and had destroyed somewhere around 90% of all sugar plantations by 1900. So the sugar production was really destroyed in the independence wars against Spain and then the fight against the U.S. occupation. So a lot of U.S. investors saw big opportunities to go in and buy up land cheap because they've been destroyed. And U.S. businesses and investors go in and they buy up somewhere around 10% of all the land in Cuba by 1912. And they continue buying more after that. And historians estimate that U.S.-owned sugar refining mills are about 75% of all sugar production in Cuba by 1928. So U.S. businesses own basically 3/4 of the Cuban sugar economy by the time the Great Depression starts. And that's pretty extreme for one foreign power, one investor class from a foreign country to have such a dominant foothold on the biggest economic sector of another country. And as the Great Depression gets going, the Congress in the United States will start making changes to tax laws, especially tariffs, after 1933 when they get into power. And one thing they did in the 1930s was to cut tariffs, import taxes on Cuban sugar being imported into the United States. So they cut the tax rate, but at the same time they also created a quota for the entire U.S. Sugar market. So they say that so much sugar is allowed to be sold in the United States on a yearly basis. And they also say they kind of divide up percentages of the U.S. market to different areas for imports or even for domestic sugar refiners. So in those laws in the 1930s, the U.S. Congress gives 28% of the U.S. sugar market for sugar sales to Cuban imports. And in doing that, the U.S. Congress combines with these U.S. businesses to logistically virtually control Cuba's sugar economy, which meant that they controlled much of the Cuban economy in general. And U.S. Congress will keep that quota system in place up to the 1960s. So this is a generational thing that goes on for decades. So the entire Cuban economy is in pretty bad position in the 1920s. Cuba's landowners are largely not even living in Cuba itself. And those that do live in Cuba often don't even live on the land that they own. They live in Havana or some other big city where they can really live it up. So you have a system of landowners that are basically absent from their own property that they control. To get into the political side of this, a new Cuban president is elected in 1925 named Geraldo Machado. And Machado becomes known pretty quickly for trying to stay in power past his term. He extended his presidential term unconstitutionally, basically to extend the years on his term into 1933. And that angered a lot of the more radical elements in Cuba, especially university students and city-based workers. And their anger grew when the Depression hits around 1930 and basically destroys Cuban sugar prices and unemployment skyrockets. And Machado's only way of really staying in power is to militarily repress the population. And that tended to anger virtually everybody, all social classes in society, the poor, the middle class, even some of the elite. There's a lot of calls for political reform to end this stuff, And even former politicians that Machado had tried to influence or push around, even they start publicly calling him a dictator. And the big change hits when President Roosevelt enters office in the United States in 1933 and starts publicly criticizing Machado for his repressive tactics. And at that point, in August of 1933, Cubans launch what's called a general strike, which means that the Cuban workforce basically stays home. They don't go to work, and they don't go out and buy anything. So basically, by staying home and doing nothing, they try to destroy their own economy in order to force their political leaders out of office. And he didn't resign willingly. The military basically overthrew Machado and then kicked him out of the country in 1933. So the general strike attempt is fairly successful. And new elections are called, and a new guy is elected in 1933, who was basically a university professor, who was a kind of hero to the student-based movements that had been going against Machado for several years by that point. So Ramon Grau San Martin was elected to the presidency in 1933. He takes office, and he becomes a pretty exceptional president in a lot of ways. In his first 100 days in office, he ended the Platt Amendment, which had given the United States so much power over the Cuban government. So he stops that pretty much immediately when he walks into office. He built up a minimum wage for Cuban workers. He enacted women's voting rights throughout the country, and also created major land reforms. So these are a collection of 4 or 5 gigantic political changes in Cuba that are often seen as very progressive and based in the idea that all Cubans are equal and should have an equal say. And to do all this in just the first basically 3 months of his presidency is pretty impressive. People who are not impressed were the U.S. leaders, who realized how quickly they're losing power over Cuba. So a lot of U.S. leaders, including the U.S. ambassador to Cuba, says that San Martin's ideas are, quote, communistic, end quote. And the U.S. government starts basically hatching a plot to overthrow San Martin by the end of the year. And they hatched that plot with the Cuban military to overthrow him and basically put someone else in office. And there is a military coup in 1933 that kicks San Martin out of office. And the leader of that coup is named Fulgencio Batista. So he's a military officer. He's basically a sergeant in the military, but he's pretty high up. He has a lot of followers in the Cuban military, to put it easily. So he's basically the military leader of the coup against San Martin. But he did not really want to be president himself, and he accepted the fact that the United States wanted someone else to be president. So he allows other politicians to take the high offices. So Batista remains in the military, but since he has so much of a following within the military, he kind of stays in the political shadows. And he basically runs the military that has huge influence over the president. And in doing so, Batista is really one of the head decision makers in Cuba, even though he's not officially in any political office. So he's a major political power player in Cuba. And the new Cuban government allowed the end of the Platt Amendment to continue, but also allowed the United States to keep its military base at Guantanamo Bay. So Batista largely dominates Cuban politics from the background. And then he ran for president himself in 1940 and won, so he served as president for 4 years. And in those 4 years got a new constitution written for Cuba that's fairly progressive in several major ways, and kept some of the reforms that San Martin had implemented. And in the 1944 election, San Martin actually comes back and runs for election again and wins the 1944 vote, so he becomes president for 4 years. But by this point, he has become hugely corrupted, so he is a very corrupt politician, and scandals just kind of surround him and his administration, and the population is quickly outraged at some of the decisions he's making. So he does not have much of a chance in the next elections in 1948. So the country chooses another president in 1948 who goes into office, but that guy turns out to be even more corrupt than San Martin was. So there's this massive problem with government corruption in the 40s going into the early 50s. And just before the 1952 elections, Batista comes back with the military and ran another coup that overthrew the sitting president and kicked them all out of office. And at this point, Batista does personally take control over the Cuban government and establishes a dictatorship. And he will control the country through the rest of the 1950s. So even with all these political changes, even with some more voting rights, the Cuban economy doesn't change very much at all. It's still almost completely based in sugar. Sugar is the driving force of the Cuban economy. And so the Cuban economy suffers quite a lot during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Picks up somewhat during World War II because U.S. economy picks up and the United States government wants to buy a lot of supplies from all over the world to build up its own military and send them out to win the war. So the Cuban economy, though, is doing generally so badly throughout this whole era that a lot of Cubans just kind of give up on politics. They basically figure that this combination that's been running Cuba for decades by now, this combination of the landowning elite in Cuba, the Cuban military, and the U.S. influence is just too difficult to overcome. So a lot of Cubans in the 30s and 40s really give up on politics. They see it as just kind of pointless and futile because the power players are going to get what they want no matter what the popular opinion is. So Batista in the 1950s allows a lot of tourism from the United States, allows U.S. businesses to continue controlling the Cuban sugar production, and even sold a whole bunch of Cuban land and Cuban businesses to American mobsters, mobsters largely from New York City, that brought prostitution and gambling and all kinds of things that are legal in the United States, brought them into Cuba to make Cuba into basically like a kind of island Las Vegas where all kinds of craziness and immorality are allowed to occur. So a lot of American tourists that are looking for that kind of entertainment, they go to Cuba, largely in the 1950s. And Batista allows it because these mobsters pay bribes basically to Batista and his high government leaders. So what you get in the 1950s in Cuba is this circumstance where the wealthier Cubans live very well. They're usually big landowners. They're involved in sugar trades or in gambling or something like this. They usually live in the big cities. They sometimes don't even live in Cuba themselves. They live in the United States, or they travel back and forth between the United States and Cuba so much that they're just kind of transient. They're absentee landlords, basically. So these wealthier Cubans spend a lot of time in the United States, and even when they come back to Cuba, they bring back U.S. products, they bring back U.S. culture, and so U.S. culture becomes a kind of thing amongst the Cuban elite, the very wealthy Cubans. They are much more kind of connected to the United States. They're basically Americanized. And they create basically a whole different culture than what the average Cuban worker experienced on a daily basis. And a lot of Cuban workers, as the 1950s progress, become very angry about that. So you have this kind of big economic and social and cultural distinction between the rich and the poor. And it just, the gap between those two groups just grows year after year, to the point where the poor feel very excluded, they feel very oppressed, and they feel very angry. So that pent-up hostility toward the government and U.S. influence and their own major landlords and business leaders will start to boil over in other revolutionary movements in the 1950s. So we'll get to that in a future lecture, and we'll stop today just as the 1950s really gets going.